us about the carbon markets. I mean, that one aspect, right? Explain for our audience kind of what that looks like, what are carbon markets, the role in addressing climate change, all the nuances that maybe you teach as well.
Absolutely. Well, that can take the whole podcast, but I will try to be
Just okay.
very
Yeah.
short. To be very short, because first of all, one of the most important parts when we talk about carbon markets, and the first thing that I say is we have to differentiate voluntary carbon markets and compliance carbon markets.
Hmm.
Our main focus has been in compliance carbon markets. What is the main difference? A lot of people knows the voluntary carbon markets. That is the one that if you fly whatever airline and say, hey, you want to offset your emissions, buy those offsets. It's called offsets because you offsets emissions, and the supply comes from anywhere in the world from projects. One that are quite interesting, like carbon removal. You can buy today, let's say, direct carbon capture that is can cost you $1,000 one ton, or you can plant trees and sequester, or you can have this type. This is the voluntary carbon market, unregulated, is all over the world, unlimited supply. I think it's going to a lot of changes. That's the one that you see in the news for greenwashing, for a lot of issues. And that market is very small. Actually, it's only around $2 billion, but it has a lot of attention. The compliance carbon markets is the one that is interesting for us and is the one that we have been paying attention. As the name implies, first is compliance, is running by the governments. So in the United States, actually, is started back in 1990. I don't know if you remember, the US have a big problem with acid rain and the acid
Yeah.
sulfur. And you will imagine that the Republicans say, hey, we don't like taxes. Well, we don't create a market-based mechanism that, people like companies who pollute or can, if they can be free. If you want to pollute, okay, pollute, but you pay, and there is a market for that, and we put pricing on carbon. And actually, that's how you reduce the sulfur acid in 1990. When we have this conversation, there is a video in the 80s that asked one of the guys that I admire, economists, that is Milton Friedman, right? And Friedman say, okay, you don't want government for anything. And they ask him, what about pollution? And he say, look, maybe in that case we can be hybrid, and a cap and trade market mechanism can be the best. So Europe so how that works, okay, is very simple. It's called cap and trade. So let's put the example of Europe. The US have a system, Europe has a system, China have it, but it's very similar. Let's say 80% of our emissions comes from 7 sectors. Normally power, that produced with gas, with coal, oil, cement, steel, glass. And let's say, okay, why we're gonna put a cap, or let's say your emissions this year is around, let's say, 1 million tons, just to put an example. And we want to reduce that to 50% in the next 10 years. So what are we gonna do? We're gonna put a cap, a limit on those emissions. We're gonna create the same number of allowances. Involuntary is called offsets, and this is an allowance because it's a permit to emit. In the voluntary space, you already emit and you offset. What we call in Spanish, you sin, you pray, and you are even. That's quite of controversy, right? In the voluntary space. But in the cap and trade, it's a permit. So it's very simple. Hey guys, if you want to pollute, you can do 2 things. You pollute, if you pass your limit, you pollute and you have to have those permits. Or if you don't pollute, you can have your permit and you can sell it to anyone and have cash. So, and that supply reduced every single year. And imagine how many allowances or permits will be in 10 years, was half. And those sectors and every company every single year has to present, and it's like just to present a report of the emissions that is really easy to measure, and they have to have the exact number of allowances. And imagine that report is like SEC report, right? Like a public company. You have a methodology, you have to follow it, it's easy to verify, blah, blah, blah. And if you have an excess, you can do 2 things. You keep it for yourself for the futures, or you sell it in the market. And since the supply reduce, that have 2 signals. The first one is that the prices are gonna go up, right? Basic economics. Less supply, same demand, prices are gonna go up. And that create a very good incentive. And that's why we like cap and trade systems.